Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the RDS, I'd like to welcome you all here this evening. I'm particularly pleased to welcome all our overseas guests who have joined us from the Teagasc-sponsored Food Security Futures Conference, which is being held in the Ballsbridge Hotel today and tomorrow. This major international conference is being held in advance of the Irish EU Presidency Conference on Hunger, Nutrition and Climate Justice. That will be held in Dublin Castle on Monday and Tuesday next. Since 1731, the RDS, without any government funding, has attempted to harness effective voluntary expertise to encourage the development of agriculture, industry, science, and the arts in Ireland. And tonight's event and our cooperation with Teagasc in it fits perfectly into that. Between now and 2050, growth in global population and changing diets in emerging countries are projected to bring about a 70% increase in food demand. This demand must be addressed in the context of increasing unpredictable weather, the changing pattern of disease in crops and livestock, some caused by anticipated climatic changes, and some by varying uptakes of technology and spending on research. Simultaneously, the depletion or threatened depletion, or certainly greater pricing power over fossil hydrocarbons will increase demand for biomass, for biofuels and other raw materials, which may compete with land use for food production. The topic for tonight's address, and we're particularly pleased to have Dr. Shangan Pan as our speaker. The topic for tonight's address is the role of Europe in meeting the global food and nutrition challenge. It's particularly appropriate that we have an international speaker of such caliber to address this issue, and particularly one who is not from Europe. The lack of productivity growth in European agriculture has been striking over the last 20 years, as Brazil and the US have forged ahead, and modern African leaders look increasingly to the Americas for agricultural and food production inspiration and expertise rather than to Europe. The challenge is further exacerbated by the current economic and financial crisis, the increasing concentration of access to natural resources, and the destabilization of some ecosystems. These grand challenges are a real threat not only to future food supplies, but also to global stability and prosperity. They are heightening the uncertainty about the future development of agriculture in some key areas, and are rendering it a challenge to visualize how the growing demand for food and other bio-based materials can be met without further compromising the provision of some ecosystem services, particularly water in some particularly sensitive areas. There is an urgent need to take these challenges seriously and begin preparations for a transition towards increasingly efficient and sustainable food consumption and production patterns. It's in this context that I welcome the initiative taken last year by Teagasc and the RDS Agricultural Committee to present a series of public lectures on the growing challenges of sustainably meeting the food security needs of the world. The series aims to explore key aspects of the complex challenge of producing sufficient food and ensuring fair access to that food. Each lecture is presented by an outstanding international speaker and seeks to contribute to heightening awareness of the scale of the problem and how all of us, governments, civil service, civil society, the private sector and individual consumers have a role to play in addressing the challenges. I'm sure our speaker this evening will continue the very high standards so far set in this unique lecture series. I'm now delighted to welcome our MC for the evening, Leo Enright, well-known broadcaster and science commentator, who will introduce our main speaker, Dr. Shan, and the panel members. So Leo, can I hand over to you?
Thanks very much, Matt, and again, very welcome to this evening's session. We're particularly pleased this evening to have a contribution from Asia. It's a particular pleasure because we very often hear from European expertise. We hear European expertise, but it's not so often we get the expertise or wider and more varied context. Just before we begin, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping, which I like to do at the beginning of each of these lectures. And that is to show you the exits. There's exits down here on either side. There's an exit here, and also there are two exits behind me. The reason I show you the exits is this. If you came to this evening expecting a gentle little lecture, dawdling along with a few nice pictures and just talking in the vaguest terms about general principles, you know, a pleasant, quiet, not too challenging evening, then you're in the wrong place, and really you should just leave now. It's not that sort of lecture series. This is a series in which we encourage our speakers to be as dense as possible with information, so that you can come away with an understanding of how complex the problem is. One of the great criticisms of a well-known presentation program is that it always brings everything to a focus at the top, to a point like a pyramid. Whereas, as we all know, the real world is exactly the opposite. It begins with something small, but the complexities just grow as you look at something more deeply. And that's really what we try to do at these lectures, is to give you a real sense of the complexity. And to do that, it involves putting a lot of charts up on the screen, and you really do need to be paying attention. I should also say, it's important because we do go through so much information, that you can go back on the Teagasc website and look at a video of tonight's proceedings, but also we will place on the website the presentation itself, so that you can see these charts in all their glory and in high definition. I think that's important too, because I know a lot of people here are coming here to try to gain information upon which they themselves can make decisions. So this is really for interested members of the general public, of course, but also for people who may very well find the information tonight of value in decisions that they have to make for themselves or their organizations. So it's a great pleasure indeed to invite a world leader on the whole issue of food security to speak this evening. Dr. Shenggen Fan got his master's, his bachelor's and his master's at Nanjing Agricultural University in China. He went on to do a PhD at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, which of course is a Swedish town. I don't know if he ever dared to venture across the Mississippi River to St. Paul, which is a wild Irish town, but it may be indeed that Dr. Fan has had an opportunity to see some of the Irish bars in St. Paul. I hope he did. Since then, he's had a very interesting career. He held positions at the International Service for National Agricultural Research in the Netherlands and the Department of Agricultural Economics and Rural Sociology in the University of Arkansas. So this is a man who's seen things from a lot of different perspectives. He led the International Food Policy Research Institute's program for public investment before becoming director of the Institute's Development Strategy and Governance Division in 2005. And he is now, he joined the IFPRI in 1995 as a research fellow. He is now, of course, Director General of the Institute, and I have a great pleasure in inviting Dr. Fan now to speak to us on this important issue for all of us in Europe, but also for us here in Ireland. Watch out for some of his Irish comments. I was quite encouraged, in fact, by some of the very positive comments he had to make about work being done here. So, Dr. Fan.
Well, thank you. Good evening. What Neil didn't say in my CV or in my bio is I was a farmer in China 40 years ago, and smallholder farmer with only probably half a hectare for my whole family. But we had 5 people in our family, and we used a half-hectare, educated my family 3 brothers. So just to let you know that should be also in my CV. And I should also acknowledge some of the distinguished Irish people who have worked for CGIAR, for IPRI, for international development. David Governey is the director of finance and administration. With him, so IPRI is financially sound, management, sort of error-proof. So great contribution from him. I just wanted to acknowledge his great work at IPRI. In the meantime, we have worked with lots of Irish institutions here, including the World Concern. Tom Arnold was sitting somewhere, so he has been a great friend and great collaborator with IPRI. And many others like Brenda Rogers, a champion, great champion in supporting international agriculture research and IPRI. So I can go on and on. So what I will do today is to describe some of the global challenges in global food security. Then zoom in what Europe can really play. So using a different lens. So I'm not a European, I'm not even American. So I'm a Chinese farmer, and with some experience in Africa, Asia, and beyond. So a different lens. And if you have any questions, concerns, you can always send me an email. And all my presentation will be available in Teagasc website as well as IPRI's website. So my key messages are following. Number 1 is global hunger and malnutrition persist despite great efforts we have spent on this challenge. Now, the current and future trends will further threaten the global food security and nutrition security. So what we need to do is an integrated approach. We know that the world is also facing other challenges like declining natural resources, the climate change, increasing population, increasing volatility. So what we need to do is to integrate all this together to sustainably improve food and nutrition security in the long run. So my final message is Europe has a key role to play in all this effort. So every year, IPRI and Concern worldwide produces a global hunger index map. So we map every country about their severity of hunger. You will see that the majority of the countries who are suffering from hunger or who have alarming or extremely alarming levels of hunger are in Africa, are in South Asia. So today, more than 50 countries still have serious alarming, extremely alarming levels of hunger. So this is not acceptable. More importantly, there is a hidden hunger phenomenon. So you cannot observe that person is suffering from hunger. So hidden hunger is a lack of micronutrients, the deficient of micronutrients. Again, it's some of the African countries, South Asian countries like India, Bangladesh, who have the most severe hidden hunger. So the cost of undernutrition is very high. You will see in Africa, in South Asia, every year, the cost of undernutrition is 2% of their GDP, 3% of GDP. In the case of India, because of the lack of micronutrients, the micronutrient deficiency, 2.5% of the GDP is lost. So huge cost. So the malnutrition, undernutrition is not only a moral issue, but also economics issue. So when you talk to the Minister of Finance, usually they wanted to hear a figure from you. So 2.5%, 3%, many countries even 4% of the GDP is lost due to undernutrition. And the current and the future trends will continue to threaten food and nutrition security, which include increasing population and urbanization, rising incomes and demand, climate changes, growing natural resources constraints, rising oil prices, biofuel production, and climate change. So today, IPRI and the CGIAR research program on policy institutions and markets held a conference very close to here in Bridge Hotel on the food security future. So some of these challenges, threats were discussed in that conference. The conference will continue until tomorrow. And the global population is increasing. We have heard a figure of $9 billion in 2050. But the latest UN projection is 9.3 billion. So $300 million more, the size of US population. If we don't follow a good policy, probably $9 billion is not a limit. Probably we have to go, the total population may go beyond 9.3 billion. And more importantly, these people are moving to the cities. So right now, at this moment, 50% of the world population lives in cities. By 2050, 75%. So 75% of the population will live in cities, which means they will demand more and better food. So ironically, we have seen two phenomena. On the one hand, we have seen the society has become aging in many countries. On the other hand, we have also seen the share of young population has increased, particularly in Africa. So my own country now, people who is over 60 years old is becoming a huge number, a big share. So the Chinese have become sort of aged older before they get rich. The Chinese getting richer, but they're getting older even faster than the speed they have become richer. And for Africa, look at the share of the young population. So both young and elderly will challenge the food security. For elderly, they need protection. They deserve food. So they have the right to access to nutritious food. For young population, they need employment. They need income. Without income, without employment, their food security, nutrition security will be compromised. So rising incomes will lead to higher food demand and diet changes. So we have already seen that trend in OECD countries in the last 50 or 60 years. So that trend has slowed down in the last 10 or 20 years. But in emerging economies, in developing countries, that trend just started. Look at the per capita consumption of major food items growth, the growth of the major food items. Meat, beef, pork, vegetables, fruits, cereal grains. So it is meat like poultry that will increase very fast in developing countries. Their per capita consumption will increase by 30 or 40% in the next 20 years, not in the next 40 years. So from 2009 to 2021, in 20 years, the per capita consumption of poultry will be increased by almost 40%. Beef, probably another 30 to 40%. So diet change will challenge our food security. And in my own country, again, China, that diet pattern has changed particularly fast. The Chinese per capita income right now is about probably a quarter of Japanese, but their meat consumption is actually higher than Japanese. Now, water scarcity is growing a problem. So it's not just a physical scarcity, but also economic scarcity. So physically, there's a lack of water in many parts of the world, particularly in northern parts of China, in South Asia. The physical constraint or physical limitation or physical scarcity also limits the water use, particularly in Africa. So we will face increasingly water scarcity, whether it's physical or economic. And again, it is in some of the poorest regions, some of the poorest countries, where the water scarcity will be the most severe. The arable land is the basic fundamental resources for producing food. For the last 40, 50 years, the expansion of the land has accounted for more than 50% of the world food production. But we won't have that resources anymore. Per capita land is declining. Look at the trend of land loss for the last 40 years, from 1960 to 2010. In Africa, so on average, the person has lost 80 square meters. And that trend will continue. So global farmland has also been degraded. So it's not only the total amount of land, but also the quality of land has declined. So 24% of global land area has been affected. It's not just in dry area. We know that the dry area can become desertificated, become desert. But even in irrigated areas, many parts of irrigated areas have seen a decline of soil fertility and soil quality. And in fact, some of the most fertile land in Punjab, Haryana of India is the traditional green revolution belt. The land quality has declined. And parts of China, Yangtze River Delta, and parts of Nile River Delta. So we have seen declining land fertility. So on the per capita basis, from 1970 to 2000, the land area has declined by 65%. In the next 40 years, the per capita land will decline by another 50%. So severe land constraint in the future. And for the last 4 or 5 years, we have seen increased food price levels, starting from 2007, 2008. And one interesting phenomena, or not necessarily interesting phenomena, a striking phenomena is high correlation between oil price and food price. And that correlation has become even stronger over time because a couple of reasons, the biofuel production, and also increase the cost from energy in the agriculture sector. So 20%, 30% of agriculture production is related to energy, fertilizers, fuels, machinery. So increasing correlation between oil price and food price. As you know, the oil prices are quite volatile. Depends on political stability, depend on many other factors, which also means that food prices will become very volatile in the future. Indeed, look at the two charts. The volatility of food prices have increased tremendously over the last 4 or 5 years. So one is the level of the food prices remain very high. The other is increased volatility. Then climate change will come, and it will come sooner than we thought, and it will come to hit us soon, hard, very hard. We were talking about 2 degree plus world, but today it's a 4 degree. So by 2100, business as usual, this planet will be 4 degrees warmer. And this has tremendous implications on our livelihoods, particularly food security, like water resources. So 2 degrees warmer means that annual runoff will decrease by 20–40% in some of the major river basins. 4 degrees warmer, that reduction will double. And clearly, the Amazon rainforest will die back. So many of the forestry will become, will be transformed into biomass woodlands, so not forestry anymore. And obviously, clearly, agriculture and ecosystem will be affected in a large way. Drought will happen very, very frequent and very extreme. And sea level will rise much faster, particularly in tropical area. The sea level will rise 15 to 20% higher. In some of the most fertile areas, like Mekong River Delta in Vietnam, fertile rice production areas, even with 2 degrees, 20%, 30% of land will be submerged. So with 4 degree rise, so submerged land will be even bigger. And at IPRI, at International Food Policy Research Institute, So we are looking at these scenarios very carefully to model the impact of 4-degree world on global food security. Where and how, by how much, the poor people will be affected by this 4-degree rise. So what we need is an integrated approach because the food security challenge has become so complex. And Europe has a specific role here in tackling the global food security challenges. So some of these approaches include continue to accelerate investment in agriculture to enhance smallholder productivity, nutrition, and resource use efficiency. Scale up productive social safety nets to protect poor and vulnerable groups. Invest in climate-smart technologies and policies. Improve global coordination to reduce food price volatility, and support country-led processes for food and nutrition security. I would dive in a bit deeper around these issues. So accelerated investment in agriculture, R&D, and rural infrastructure is must. This is the best investment we can do. And improve access to inputs. Many smallholders do not have access to inputs, particularly fertilizers. Why smallholders? Smallholders account for 80% of the food production in developing countries. And they account for majority of the poor and hungry people in the world. So focusing on smallholders will bring win-win opportunities. Increase access to high-value supply chains and markets, fruits, vegetables, livestock products. Promote smallholder-friendly innovations. Smallholders do not have access to finance, insurance, and other support. The business as usual approach has not worked, so we need more innovations. How we can use community banking, ICTs, like cell phones, to help smallholders access to financial services. Risk management, farmers, smallholders face tremendous risks, particularly the markets have become so volatile. The climate change is going to hit them hard. And new institutional arrangements, for example, producers' cooperatives. Here in Europe, in Ireland, there's a great tradition that farmers organize themselves to form cooperatives, to work together, to deal with supply chains, to deal with politicians, increase their voices. I think the developing countries should do the same. Leverage agriculture for enhanced nutrition and health. There's a great opportunity to leverage agriculture for improving nutrition and health. So agriculture's objective is not just to produce maximize grains. Agriculture's objective is to grow nutritious or healthy people. So I'm glad that I think that John McDermott is here. He's leading a very large CGI research program to link agriculture to health and nutrition. So this is very exciting. The first time the CGI tried to put nutrition and health in its research agenda. So some of the exciting research results have already shown a great impact. For example, the biofortification program led by IPRI. So through breeding, the micronutrients can be added to food crops, such as iron, zinc, vitamin A, and probably even beyond. It's a very cost-effective way, particularly for many smallholders who are subsistence. So they consume what they grow. And many smallholders' production is very much concentrated on grains, like maize, rice, or wheat. These crops are not necessarily nutritious, but do not have high density of micronutrients. But through scientific research, through breeding, the nutrition value or nutrition contents of these crops can be intensified. So we have seen some successes in many countries. DR Congo, Nigeria, Zambia, India, Uganda, Pakistan. So many farmers have already used biofortified crops, beans, cassava, maize, permanent, rice, sweet potato, and wheat. Improve the nutrition value of these crops. Well, there are many other research programs that we can do. For example, integrated the nutrition into the whole value chain. So not just in the area of consumption, even starting from planting, from farming practices up to consumption. And promote resource-efficient technologies and practices. The business as usual approach will not work. Even the Green Revolution technologies we experienced in Asia, Vietnam, China, and India. Very resource-intensive farming practices. Water, land, fertilizers were used in producing grains. So that's why you see depleting underground water, depleting soil fertility from overuse of chemical fertilizers, huge waste of energy, water, and fertilizers. We need more innovations. New fertilizers should be developed. So the farmers can target fertilizers to their soil, to their specific needs, and slow release fertilizer through nanotechnologies. So right now, India and China, more than 50 or 60% of fertilizers have been wasted through runoff. They went to the underground water. They went to the rivers. Not only efficient loss, but also huge, huge environmental costs. And the water conservation, low-cost drip irrigation, and recycling of water. Sometimes it's not, you don't need a very fancy technology. In some of the provinces in China, the farmers build a catchment around their households to catch the water and build underground water tanks to save that water there from the rainfall, then use that water to deep irrigate their crops. And these underground tanks are very valuable. Now, even in the marriage market, when a girl wants to marry with a boy, a girl wants to see how many water tanks that family would have. So the threshold is 13. I think in Uganda, it's 13 cows or 13 animals. But there it's water tanks. So some of the indigenous technologies can be very useful, can be very powerful. With 600 millimeters of rainfall, these farmers were able to produce 3 tons, 6 tons of maize per hectare. And address food losses and waste. We have heard a magic number that 40% of our food is wasted. For developing countries, that waste mainly happens in retailing and household level. I don't know how many of you threw away foods every week, or even in the retailing sector, you see the best consumed by certain dates. So when that date is over, we threw them away. Huge waste over there. And for developing countries, the waste or losses usually happen during the production stage, processing stage, transportation. So the magnitude of the problem is similar, 40%, but the nature of the problem is different. So we need different solutions for different problems. And I have seen some exciting solutions. For example, certain technologies have developed for households or retailing sector to test the quality of the food. So even that food is expired beyond the so-called best consumed date, but they still can be consumed without much health challenges. The scale up productive social safety nets. We know that many poor people, women and children, farmers, need to be protected, particularly during crisis. But we should also make sure that that protection can help them to grow in the long run. So productive social safety net. IPRI, with the support of many donors, including Irish Aid, in Ethiopia, we evaluated these productive social safety net programs. During the Horn of Africa crisis 2 years ago, because of drought, 60 years, in 60 years, most severe drought in Horn of Africa. 16 million people were suffering from malnutrition, from hunger. Somalia, Kenya, and part of Ethiopia. But because of this productive social safety net, 6 million people in Ethiopia were prevented from hunger and starvation. Somalia was suffering from political instability, security issues, but Kenya didn't. But Kenya suffered from hunger and malnutrition. So you can see the difference between whether you have a productive social safety net or not. And invest in climate-smart technologies and policies. We know that agriculture accounts for 30% of the global greenhouse gas emission. So agriculture is part of the problem. But agriculture could also be part of the solution. But technologies, policies, incentives are needed, particularly smallholders. Smallholders have great potential to move towards so-called triple win opportunities. Triple win, so through the adaptation, through the use of technologies, through the changed farming practices, the smallholders will be able to adapt to climate change. The smallholders will be able to improve productivity. And more importantly, the smallholders, or equally importantly, the smallholders can also help to mitigate the climate change. So what they need is capacity, knowledge, information, incentives. If smallholders adapt to climate change or help to mitigate the climate change, what is the incentive? Is there a carbon market for smallholders? If there is one, how much should we pay them? $7 a ton of carbon sequestration or $20? So we need to work together to provide incentive for smallholders to mitigate the climate change. The potential is huge. Then improve global coordination and reduce food price volatility. The food price came by surprise in 2007, 2008. Nobody predicted that. The global institutions failed in predicting the global food prices. And clearly, they also failed in addressing global food price volatility or crisis. IPRI, my predecessor, Joachim von Braun, probably was one of the only person who warned the world, alerted the world in 2007. I remember December 2007 in China during a CGI annual general meeting, saying that if we don't pay attention to our production, if we don't invest in agriculture, we will have a food crisis. So unfortunately, what he said became reality. So we all need to work together to predict, to prevent food crisis. One is global and regional grain reserves. So when a crisis hits, whether it's natural disasters, whether it's market crisis, we can move the grains in our reserve very quickly to help the poor, particularly women and children. So they will be able to access to food. That reserve needs to be set up. And that reserve has to be located in poor food importing countries so they can access to food very quickly. And support transparent and free global trade. Again, during the food crisis, we failed in doing that. So many countries try to protect their own consumers, their own market by imposing export bans. China, India, Thailand, Vietnam, many countries did it. By doing that, they actually further exacerbated the global food price crisis. The prices have become even higher and even more volatile. Even certain buyers, importers, became very panicked. So they go to the market to buy at any prices. Oil-rich countries like Saudi Arabia, they did that. So from both importer side and exporter side, they further exacerbated the global food price crisis. So we need to work together to make sure that we have a transparent, free global trade. It's particularly important during food crisis. And to minimize food fuel competition, we have to recognize that there is a competition between poor people's food and rich people's food. And monitor global food prices and speculation. When market works, then the speculation of volatility will be able to be minimized or even prevented. When there's a lack of information or there's asymmetry in information, then prices or the market will fail. And the market will not properly reflect the true prices from demand side and supply side. So on the G20's initiative, IPRI, FAO, World Bank, and IFAD, 10 international organizations have provided background support for G20 countries to set up the so-called agricultural information system, AMIS. So I really hope this AMIS will happen soon, so we can share the information and make sure that information is transparent. And speculation is another issue. We still do not have conclusive evidence to show that speculation was a cause of a global food crisis. But we know that, we do know that if there is excessive speculation, it could further exacerbate the food price crisis. So we needed to monitor who is speculating, how much, and the impact on food market. And support country-led processes. In 2009, when G8 countries came together, they committed $23 billion to support country-led development process so the countries will be able to solve their food security issues. So right now, the only part of money has been implemented. And more importantly, the country's capacity has not been built. And improve evidence in what policies have and have not worked. Sometimes we really don't know whether this policy will work, whether that policy will work. We could also learn from natural scientists to do experiments. We can experiment policy. And that is what China, Vietnam, and probably India have done to some limited extent. So we learn from these experiments before we scale up. So right now in India, the government is proposing a very large food security bill, probably one of the largest subsidy programs in the world, and cash transfer program. We don't know whether it will work. However, we could experiment in some small locations and really understand what are the constraints for the program to work. So country-led, country-owned policies are so critical. And the IPRI's role there is to help these countries to improve their capacity. Now let me come back to my major message here. Europe has a key role to play. Ireland is part of Europe. And I'm glad to see that the Ireland has integrated Europe very well. So some of the roles the European countries can play. One is to increase development assistance to agriculture. So agriculture is so critical. And expand investment in agriculture, R&D, and support technology transfer. Here, what I mean is expanding investment in agriculture, R&D here, in Ireland, in Europe. And then share that technologies or knowledges with other developing countries. Reform domestic agriculture policies and promote open trade. I know this is a politically sensitive topic. Again, I'm a bit neutral, so I'm not a European, so I can say what I want to say. And promote South-South, North-South learning. So Europe has a particularly important role there. And build national capabilities. Increase assistance to agriculture. You will see for the last 10 years or 15 years, the investment in agriculture is very small. The overall ODA has increased. The next chart. But if you look at the right-hand side, the share of agriculture in ODA, 2%, 3% per year. So after the food crisis, it has increased to 4%. I wanted to challenge Europeans. Can you increase your ODA to agriculture to 10%? African nations committed themselves to spend 10% of their national budget on agriculture. The 2003 Maputo Declaration, African leaders came together. They agreed to spend 10% of the national budget. IPRI has been tracking their performance. So many countries have reached that target. Ethiopia, many countries. Many countries are close to 10%. So can the Europeans do the same thing? Can do similar magnitude, 10% of your ODA to agriculture. The good news is Irish is already spending 10% of their budget on agriculture. Good model to follow. Good model for other countries to follow. So the Irish aid spends bigger shares on agriculture, on emergency recovery, disaster preparation, health, humanitarian areas. All these are good spending. So I should congratulate our colleagues from Irish Aid that so your spending portfolio is a good model for many other countries to follow. Expand investment in agriculture R&D. For the last decade or two, I have seen very small growth or non-growth in OECD countries spending on agriculture research, including the United States. And even within that limited budget, most of the spending is not for productive investment. That spending is on natural resource conservation or many other non-productive areas. So OECD countries, particularly Europe, needed to increase investment in agriculture research, more productive agriculture research to enhance your yield, particularly in crop livestock breeding, water and energy saving, low carbon agriculture, food safety. All these issues are also the top concerns of developing countries. So when you do the research, and you can share your results with developing countries. Second generation biofuels is another technology that Europeans can spend more investment on. And technology transfer for food security. The European Union, EC, already set up some sort of platform to share their technologies with Asians. They need to do more, particularly with Africans. So on a G8 initiative, so there is a program called Technology Platform to promote the sharing of technologies among different countries, developing countries, but also between developed and developing countries. Now, reform domestic agriculture policies and promote open trade. Europeans needed to revisit farm policies and cut subsidies. Look at that chart. Some good news has already happened. So Europeans has cut down dramatically on product-related programs. So the subsidies are not linked to the production. More subsidies are linked to farmers' income. And the Europeans have also removed export subsidies. So it has moved towards a good trend, but more needs to be done. Even the so-called decoupled payments have direct and indirect impact on production, distorting global trade. And the Europeans should also open the markets to Africans, to South Asian farmers, and reduce or eliminate grain-based biofuels. The European countries, OECD countries, account for a large share of the global biofuel production. That has been one of the major reasons why food prices remain very high, why food prices remain volatile. Open trade will benefit many people, In fact, will benefit more to developing countries. The $29 billion will be gained by developing countries. $9 billion gained by developing countries. And global income gains will be $70 billion. It's a huge, huge benefit. And promote South-South and North-South learning. So exploit large knowledge bases, engage in broad partnerships, promote successful partnerships, and developing innovative partnerships. So lots of partnership opportunities can be explored. And facilitate South-South knowledge exchange. And the European donors should also have an open arm to some emerging donors, Brazilians, Indians, and Chinese. They are increasing their investment in Africa, in South Asia. That trend is so strong, probably will overtake the traditional donors' investment. But today, we still don't see them talking to each other. I often go to the round table of the traditional donors, the Europeans, Americans, even I'm a Chinese. But I don't see the emerging donors from Brazil, from India, from China, or from Indonesia. I think we must change that. So we can all work together, coordinate our programs, learn from each other. We're not afraid of competition. We need a different model, different experience. Let the country choose. I think the Europeans can facilitate that process. South-South learning, North-South learning, collaboration, and working together. Building capacity is critical. I have seen some professors here from Cork College, even from Belfast. The Europeans have trained lots of students, PhD students, master students. Many of them went back. And we need to continue to do that. If we want to support a country-driven development process, capacity is so critical. Without capacity, they will not be able to drive, they will not be able to lead, they will not be able to own their programs. So let's expand that sort of training program. Train more PhDs, more master degree students from Africa, from South Asia. And support some of the capacity buildings of institutions in Africa and South Asia. A particular example is Teagasc support. Teagasc, Comprehensive African Agriculture Development Program, is an African-owned, African-driven program, but it needs capacity in implementing that program. It needs a capacity to monitor, to track the progress. The part of that program is a peer review mechanism. So the African leaders wanted to peer review their performance. Great. But they need information. They need scorecards so they can review each other's performance. So IPRI and other CGIS centers, International Livestock Research Institute, IATA, and the IMI, the Water Institute, are working together in supporting the capacities of African institutions, SRECA, COMESA, ECOWAS, and the African Union. So they can have the capacity to monitor, to track the progress, and can analyze their policy issues. And toward the post-2015 agenda, so you might have heard that there have been so many discussions about what we are going to do after 2015. In 2000, the global leaders came together. They committed to cut the poverty and hunger by half, or the rate of hunger, the rate of poverty by half, from 1990 level to 2015. But today we are not on track. So what are we going to do after 2015? We need a new vision. That vision must be ambitious, must be precise, and also realistic. Just about a week ago, there was a high-level consultation in Madrid, Spain. Mary Robinson also went there, I was there as well. So I challenged the global leaders, including Ban Ki-moon, can we revisit our goals? That is to end hunger sustainably by 2025, which is very different from the UN Secretary General's so-called zero hunger initiative. So he challenged us to eliminate hunger in our lifetime, the first time in lifetime. I said, what do you mean lifetime? My lifetime, my grandchildren's lifetime? And they changed it to in our generation. Again, what does a generation mean? 20 years? One generation is 20 years, 100 years ago. Today, a generation could be 40 years. So let's be precise. So 2025. So I changed that vision. I changed two words. Sustainably. Food production has to be sustainable. Hunger reduction must be sustainable. Well, obviously, how do we define sustainability is another issue. But 2025, why 2025? It's 13 years away. I think if we all work together, we can achieve that. Many countries experience, including Brazil, Vietnam, China, even Ghana, African countries, are on the track. So if they continue what they have done in the last 20 years, they will be able to eliminate hunger. Now, clearly, how do we define hunger? The FAO data still define hunger as the calorie access to calorie. We have to redefine hunger to include nutrition, include access to micronutrients. Otherwise, we will face double, even triple burden of the hunger. That is undernourishment, the lack of calorie, or a lack of micronutrients, the second dimension, hidden hunger. The third one is overnutrition. So eat too much calorie, and diet quality has suffered. So let's all work together that we can end hunger sustainably by 2025. Now, for 2012, or even before that, we have had a lot of discussions, a lot of talks, a lot of commitments. But let's all walk the talk, So for your information, our 2012 Global Food Policy Report's title is Walk the Talk. It's available somewhere outside of this room. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Fan, and that's very, very exciting. The prospects for progress are very exciting, but the challenge is obviously unmistakable. Can I ask our panel to join us on stage? And while they do, I'd like to just again thank the social media who've been tweeting throughout Dr. Fan's presentation. It's very interesting to see, what are the themes that people pick up on, and it's clear that there were a number of themes coming out of the tweets that we were getting, and this is the ways in which people were reporting on what Dr. Fan was saying, and I'm just looking at some of them. There were a couple of themes I felt. From social media that seem to be common themes from all of the people who were tweeting about the conference. The prioritization of public research and development investment seemed to catch a lot of people, catch their attention. And there was a lot of interest as well, particularly in the economic cost of micronutrient deficiencies and some of the proposals which Dr. Fan had to make in that area for further research. So we got some very interesting comments, not so much comments, but it was interesting to see the way in which social media participants interacted with what Dr. Fan was saying. I would now invite those same people and others in the hall, but also watching online, to please now contribute to the discussion as we move forward. We'd be more than interested to hear now from members of the social media community what their thoughts are on this, and any specific comments that they would like to make. We have a Twitter desk, an active Twitter desk. Katrina's standing by, waiting for comments, and she'll be passing them up to me to feed in to this discussion. So please, those of you out there and those of you in here who are tweeting, please feel free to add your comments. I'm very pleased now to invite our panel. I mean, really, I feel a very good panel, an appropriate panel for further discussion of Dr. Phan's comments. Cát Moran is the head of Irish Aid's Hunger Unit. I think, to put it at its simplest. Her formal title is that she's Director of Thematic Sectors and Special Programs in the Development Cooperation. Anyway, it goes on forever, but anyway, DFA love large, long titles, but she is a person who has enormous experience in this very particular area. For 5 years, she was in South Africa, heading up development at the Irish Embassy in South Africa, working on management of Irish aid programs in South Africa and Zimbabwe. So they're really, I couldn't think of anyone more appropriate to talk from experience on the ground of all of these issues. So it'll be very interesting to hear her comments. And I think most of you probably know Jerry Boyle, who is the director of Teagasc, but Jerry, of course, needless to say, has a very large CV going way back, nearly as far as me, I think, Jerry, at this stage. The pair of us are getting on, but I've known of Jerry for a very, very long time. He was in Maynooth, many of you will know. He was head of the economics department in Maynooth. He's been involved, he was a senior associate with Farrell Grant Sparks at one stage, a company that we have all heard of over the years. They've certainly been a feature on our landscape. But he's a past president of the Irish Economics Association and also served as editor of the Economic and Social Review. So just to give you a flavor of the range of interests that Jerry has, and again, bringing, I think, as much of his expertise to focus on the themes that Dr. Phan has outlined. So what I'd like to do, the way we will proceed from now on, is that just for those of you who are watching bus timetables or whatever, I would aim to be finished here by 8:20 at the latest, absolute latest. But I do want to give plenty of time for discussion. I'm going to ask Cát and then Jerry to speak for a couple of minutes to the themes that Dr. Phan has addressed. And then we'll open up for questions, and not just questions, comments and discussion from the floor, and also, most importantly, from the community that's watching online, who are very keen to involve as completely as possible in this as well. So, Cát, if I could ask you first of all to pick up on Dr. Phan's themes, what are your thoughts?
Thanks very much, Leo, and thanks very much to Dr. Phan for what I thought was a really excellent analysis and a lot of information. Leo said at the start that there will be a lot of information coming through, and I think Dr. Phan did an excellent job, and congratulations to him. And thanks to Teagasc for having me along this evening. As Leo said, I'm heading up the Hunger Unit in Irish Aid, and Irish Aid is the government's official overseas development programme, and it's paid for by taxpayers' money. So it's always a good opportunity to be able to talk about what we're doing, and we're delighted to have it. I suppose just to put the remarks I'm going to make in context, we should say that Irish Aid has a really strong partnership with IFPRI, which Dr. Phan is heading up. And that's part of our relationship generally in support of agricultural research and pro-poor. And I'd emphasize that pro-poor agricultural research, which is a big part of what Irish Aid supports. And I think, just to put it in context again, I think over the last maybe 5 years or so, we've seen 5 to 7 years, we've seen somewhat of maybe a back to basics trend in terms of development trends. And that back to basics trend, I suppose, has recognized the kind of figures that Dr. Fan has talked to this evening, in terms of the number of people going hungry in the world, 870 million people, and this issue of hidden hunger. And I think those kind of figures and the global food price rises have really brought international development partners and developing country governments back to basics in terms of how are we going to feed a growing population by 2050. And the approach, I suppose, that the government of Ireland would take is that addressing poverty and hunger is a central part of Ireland's foreign policy and is very much the centrepiece of Ireland's aid development programme, Irish Aid. And within that, I suppose, since 2008, when the government appointed a hunger task force, of which Tom Arnold, who's I think still with us, was a member, we have very much since then put hunger, undernutrition, and agriculture being a big part of that as part of the centrepiece of our response to poverty. And really, the Hunger Task Force gave us great direction in terms of how we would approach that issue. So it really directed us to work with the kind of smallholder farmers that Shengen was talking to just now, and recognizing that they account for such a large part of the food production in developing countries. It also directed us to work on issues like undernutrition, and particularly looking at maternal and child undernutrition. And some of the statistics behind that are really, really shocking. If you look at the undernutrition issue in particular in relation to children, you're looking at undernutrition being the underlying cause of the deaths of 7,000 children a day. That's a really, really shocking statistic. And so much of what Irish Aid does since 2008 is really to focus what we do in supporting developing countries and our partner countries in trying to address that issue of undernutrition. And we do that in a number of different ways. We do it through supporting good governance, supporting leadership through the Scaling Up Nutrition movement that Dr. Fan mentioned. But we also do it through trying to make connections between agriculture and nutrition. So look at trying to support nutrition-sensitive agriculture, and particularly focusing on smallholder farmers there. So that's the kind of, I suppose, support and the kind of response that Irish Aid has been supporting, given the extent of the problem that we've been facing. And we've worked very much strongly with centres of the CGR system on the ground in countries like Malawi and Ethiopia in terms of making those nutrition-sensitive connections, but also working on the issue of capacity building, and capacity building at a national level, at a regional level, and very much at a local level in countries like Tanzania, where we work with ministries of agriculture, and at a very practical level in countries like Malawi, where we're working with farmers' organizations. So the National Smallholders Association of Malawi would be a very strong partner for us. And that's a very important partnership because it brings in the World Agroforestry Centre and other CGR centres who work with those farmers' organizations and bring the kind of knowledge and that transfer of knowledge and skills that's essential to improving farming practices, diversification, and making sure that the kind of amazing research that the CGR system does actually gets put into use in farmers' fields and actually has an impact in terms of the kind of food that's being produced, the diversity of it, the quality of it. And because we know, as Dr. Fan has said, it's not just about calorie intake, it's about the nutritional balance in people's diets, and that's really what makes a difference. So I just wanted to mention those kind of supports that we, as I said, have been supporting over the last couple of years. The other, I suppose, broad approaches would be looking to see how Ireland can support at country level, and I think we're coming into an exciting phase of our relationship with Teagasc in terms of making a more coherent approach across other departments and other government departments and other government agencies. And we work very closely with the Department of Agriculture and with Teagasc in trying to ensure that any knowledge and transfer of skills that can take place between Ireland and the South can be given every best chance, and in supporting South-South learning also. And I think that's key because we don't have all of the solutions in the North. Some of the solutions are coming from the South, and we need to very much recognise that. And through that comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Programme that Dr. Fan mentioned, that's a really important way of making sure that an African-owned process actually develops capacity within be it national agricultural ministries or more widely across governments in Africa. I'm very conscious that time is short, and I think people probably will have questions, but I just wanted to, I suppose, mention The European aspect, and Dr. Fan talked about the European aspect, and we're obviously a very good EU member state, and we're currently holding the presidency of the European Union at the moment. And I suppose there's a number of development initiatives that Ireland is advocating and driving during our presidency. And just to mention, I suppose, two, which would be related to this evening. And one is supporting a new policy on maternal and child undernutrition and development assistance. And that's a policy we've been working on very strongly with the European Commission. The European Commission has issued a communication on maternal and child undernutrition, and that will set a basis for which member states can gather around that and try and really increase the kind of support that's being provided to directly address maternal and child undernutrition in developing countries. And it's not only just about policy, it's actually about making sure that there's delivery on that policy. So along with that, we will have an implementation plan, which we hope to have agreed by the end of Ireland's presidency, which will really hold EU member states and the Commission accountable for the kind of actions that they will be taking to address undernutrition and hunger in developing countries. The other aspect that I'd just like to mention briefly is a priority for us to examine the linkages and address the linkages between hunger and nutrition and climate change. And Dr. Fan again gave us some very good analysis on the changing climate and the impact of that. And certainly our Taoiseach feels very strongly that it's really essential that we don't look at these issues in silos. They're very much connected issues, and that we should understand that there's connections between climate change and hunger and nutrition. And so we've made that a development priority in Ireland's presidency of the EU. And on Monday and Tuesday next week, as was mentioned, we'll be hosting an international conference on that issue. And the conference, I suppose, is to try and spotlight the issue. And it's also about recognizing the impact that climate change has on hunger and undernutrition, but also realizing that there are solutions out there. So we will have representatives of smallholder farmers organizations, from civil society, from local communities, from the developing South, who will join us. Over 100 representatives will join us. So we will have direct first-hand experience of how these issues are impacting them, but also the kind of solutions that they're coming up with in terms of how they're adapting, the kind of solutions that they have. So there'll be good, certainly South-South learning, South-North learning, and North-South learning, we hope next week on that.
Okay, Gauz, thank you very much indeed. We will certainly encourage people to go along to that and to follow it online. I think there are plans to have that online as well, so I would recommend that. We're getting quite a few comments on Twitter. One of the interesting ones, which I will be coming back to, but I throw it out now, just I'm keen for the younger members of the audience to consider it, is just some tweets we're getting about, you know, how do younger people at the beginnings of their careers get involved in this whole issue. And I'd certainly be keen to open that out to a wider discussion as we develop the conversation. But I'll call on Jerry now to comment on Dr. Fan's observations. Jerry.
Thanks, Leo, and I'd like to also compliment Dr. Fan on his excellent presentation. In fact, one of the difficulties in being a panelist on a paper like this, that it's such a diverse and rich paper that it's difficult to respond to. So I'm probably going to take up the challenge he laid down to us Europeans to see how we can be part of, in a very productive way, the solution, the challenge of sustainably reducing global hunger by 2025. One general point I think that is worth making is that, and I think we can make it with some degree of confidence based on evidence from because of our work in Teagasc, is that while of course there is a vast difference in degree in terms of the challenges faced by farmers and in particular smallholders right across the globe, nonetheless it's instructive to reflect on the fact that I think many of the challenges are similar in a country like Ireland or in many European countries, and that are faced by farmers. And many of the issues you raise here are echoed, albeit in different degrees, in the developed agricultural economy. Probably, I would say, in Ireland and in Europe, in agricultural technology, the biggest challenge still is the low scale of adoption of known technology. On any dimension we take, we find that. So I'm naturally totally supportive of his recommendation that Europe needs to invest more in research and development and rural infrastructure, but I would equally say that the error we have made, not only in Europe, but I certainly would say in Asia and in sub-Saharan Africa as well, is that there is a huge disconnect between the tremendous good work that has been done, public assistance and research, and at the same time the low level of adoption on farms. So when we talk about the challenge of access to modern production inputs in many developing countries, and that's due to all sorts of market failures pertaining to access to credit and so on, there is also, in my view, a very evident imbalance in access to public research resources. And I think it's an institutional challenge. And it's one that, as I say, is reflected to some degree in the developed countries as well. So I think certainly we tried to, in Teagasc, we have tried to develop the idea of the agricultural innovation system as the appropriate way in which to look at how we transfer knowledge. And that, at its core, that system recognizes the critical contributions of the research community, but also the extension professionals and education and training as part of a holistic model, and crucially, with the stakeholder at the core. It's easy to draw the diagram, it's more difficult to follow through on the implementation of the significance of that model. But just to react to a couple of points, and these are, Leo, you know, I'm just looking almost randomly at some of the points because we could be here for quite some time otherwise, but I would thoroughly agree with Dr. Fenn's emphasis on the importance of institutional arrangements. He singled out agricultural cooperatives as being very, very important, particularly in the marketing of agricultural produce. As we know, the problem in many, many very poor countries is that they don't have the infrastructure even to aggregate their production, which is the first step, of course, to marketing it. And I'm very impressed, for instance, by the success in many countries of the farmer field schools it's not a cooperative necessarily, but it's a very powerful institutional arrangement, which is echoed indeed in our own country. We have very effective producer discussion groups, for example, where the emphasis is on peer-to-peer learning. And we have evaluated this institutional arrangement systematically, and it works well in an economic sense. And some of your evaluation methodologies proposed, we have actually implemented. And this is a mechanism, it seems to me, to ensure linkage between a significant investment that's taken place in research and its delivery to the smallholder. And I do think that's at the core of a lot of the problem is that mismatch. Several other recommendations by Dr. Fan in terms of assessing the challenge, again, have echoes in the European context. He singled out biofortification of basic grains. I think that's a very, very important point, emphasized by Claude as well, and how we think of hunger needs to be recalibrated. Interestingly, in European context, we're putting a lot of work at the processing of food, not at the basic production level, but the objective is the same, is to fortify processed foods. And in a country like Ireland that depends so much on its competitiveness of its agricultural sector, on our ability to produce commodity products, this is an area that we are looking at as well. In the area of milk, for instance, we have known for quite some time that from a research perspective, that different breeds of animals produce milk with higher CLA content than other cows, which is of course very important for the development of young children. We know that seasonally there are differences and so on. And I can see this being developed in the livestock area over the ahead. Again, many of my colleagues, I'm sure, will have a very deep resonance with your comments in regard to integrated soil fertility management. And that has happened again in Europe and in our country in particular. It's been driven to some extent by economic incentives, but also the regulatory environment has had a huge impact. A statistic that I often like to quote in our industry, our dairy industry here, is that the use of chemical nitrogen has declined by 30% from peak in recent years. That's as a result of research demonstrating the value of natural manures and so forth, but also it's been a response to economic incentives. One point that I think is very interesting in my reaction to your comments is the importance of how we design incentives. And if I might suggest, we need to have much smarter or innovative design of incentives. I like, for example, the recent initiative in regard to ag impact, or the pull mechanism initiative, which is a focus on attempting to elicit innovative responses to market failures by the private sector. Equally, I think there are opportunities, and we have examples in Europe of where we have promoted technology adoption through smart incentives. And I think the Department of Agriculture here has led the way, for example, in subsidizing producers to become part of peer-to-peer learning groups. Sorry, Leo, I'll just wind up there. A very efficient mechanism, in my view, quite different to the traditional form of incentivization, which tends to be input specific, if you like. I think this is turns the whole incentive concept around. And I do think there are examples. Also, in Europe, I think, unlike the United States, for example, and unlike many other countries, there has been interesting initiatives around multi-sectoral approaches and area-based development interventions, which I think have the potential to be very, very important in the development context. Admittedly, they command relatively small resources to some of the other public investment programs or subsidy programs, but they are quite, certainly when I talk to US colleagues, for example, they are not very familiar with that approach to development. Anyway, Leo, I'll leave it at that. This has been really such an enriching presentation that I could go on far longer, but other people will want to contribute. So thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Jerry. So I want to open it up to the floor for a wider discussion, and I would ask if people would indicate that they want to speak. It would be helpful to me at this stage to get some idea of who wants to contribute. You can ask a question, or make a comment. Feel free to get involved in any way that you like. I should say that in terms of social media, we actually have involvement not just in Europe, but on 2 other continents. We've people participating in Africa and also on the subcontinent of India. So that's just at the moment, that's a flavor of the geographical distribution of people who are following the proceedings here this evening. Just to take one question, if I may, initially from the Twitter sphere for Dr. Fan and I think for the rest of the panel, while I wait for people in the audience to offer themselves, and I encourage you to do so, please. We got a question from John Finn, who wondered if the existing institutional arrangements were really adequate for addressing the range of problems that you're describing. Are there particular problems that you see because of the existing arrangements institutionally, and are there changes that you would like to see made that could make a difference?
Maybe a clarification. Is institutional arrangements at a farm level, global level, or national level?
I think he's talking about organizations like you. I think he's talking about that and up. I think what he's wondering is, are there, do we need, if you're going to achieve something like 2025, do we need, sorry, I'm going back into my areas of interest, do we need a NASA for the world that actually says, okay, we are going to do this and we're going to implement it? Well,
I think you opened a can of worms right now. rather difficult to close it. In fact, in Spain, when we debated about a clear accountability system, who is accountable for achieving 2025 goal, at a global level, the global institutions like FAO, the World Bank, WFP, IFAD, CGIAR have to work together. And there is a need of clear accountability system. We failed it 4 or 5 years ago in 2007, 2008. Nobody predicted the global food price crisis. And they also failed to address the crisis. What happened? Who is accountable for that? The next time, if we have another round of global food crisis, and we fail to predict, we fail to respond, well, how can we make sure they're accountable for that? So there is a need of accountability system at global level. National level, yes, nutrition is still often, because nobody is accountable for nutrition outcome at the national level. Is the Ministry of Agriculture, it's health, it's someone else? No. So we have to have a clear institution at the national level to make sure that that is accountable for nutrition and health outcome. I think Malawi is thinking about doing that. Some other countries is also thinking of doing that.
So just to follow up on, again, on that question from Twitter, you say a can of worms. I mean, do you think that actually, to simplify the answer rather than the question, that what is needed is something like a UN special representative with responsibility for knocking everybody's heads together?
There is one person called David Navarro who is coordinating the so-called high-level food and nutrition security. But the one is the capacity is still very limited, so he needs to have strong support, and also make sure that if we coordinate this group, and they have to be accountable for something. What are the results they are going to achieve? So clear accountability. Yeah, there is a group already, or there is a person supported by several people, but the capacity is still very weak. It needs to be further enhanced and make sure that that group is accountable for something, not just some talks and meetings.
Okay, well, that sounds like there's potential there for meetings taking place here in Dublin over the next few days, and also for the Twitter sphere to start agitating for a bit of coordination. I've a couple of offers from the floor.
Yeah, I wonder, are the problems as more political and economic than they are a production perspective in the countries that we're trying to educate? And do we need to educate ourselves as much as educate the people that we're trying to encourage to produce the food around the world? For example, should we educate about using the scarce resource of water in Zimbabwe to grow flowers and tobacco for the consumers in the rest of the world? Or should we educate them to use it for food production in Zimbabwe, in a country that wants foreign currency coming in? So is it a political problem, an economic problem? And do we educate the consumer, or do we educate the producer?
Good. Koch, have you an interest, would you like to take that? I mean, you would be familiar with exactly this issue.
Well, I suppose in terms of my experience in managing our development program in Zimbabwe, that's a country that was, I guess, the breadbasket of Africa for many, many years before politics got in the way, and we've seen the impact that politics can have on food production. And I think that's where you need political leadership that is strong, but that is held to account. And I suppose democracy is a huge part of that equation, because when you have good, strong democratic government, which is held to account by people, that can be a real driving factor in ensuring that smallholder farmers who have a vote and consumers in developing countries who have a vote can have their voices heard. And I think I suppose space for civil society in those environments is equally very important in the role of civil society in holding governments to account. And I think that's definitely a lesson from that particular country. And that's probably, yeah.
Okay, we have another comment or question there.
Dennis Naughton, TD, a Member of Parliament here in Ireland, and can I thank Dr. Fan for his presentation, which I think raises a huge amount of issues, not only in relation to the issues regarding research, but also from a policy perspective and from a governmental perspective. I'm want to ask you a question. I represent an organisation called AWEPA that works with European our parliamentarians and our peers in sub-Saharan Africa. And some of the issues that you've raised this evening need to be dealt with at a governmental level and at a parliamentarian level. One of those issues is in relation to 10% of ODA being targeted towards agriculture. There's a challenge to get European governments to do that. But there's also a huge challenge with the recipient countries, where the governments there want to use it for general government aid rather than have it specifically ring-fenced. How do you deal with that challenge? And maybe Koch could come in on that. And just secondly then, I was very interested in your comment regarding biofuels and the use of grains for biofuels and the contradiction that you have between a poor person's food versus a rich person's fuel. What are the challenges in dealing with that? And maybe Jerry Boyle might come in on that as well. I know that it is a big issue internationally, but where are the challenges maybe at a European level in relation to it? Thank you.
Okay, I'll ask for quick answers if you don't mind, because I do want to include a few people offering and I have a lot of questions online as well.
Yeah, I think for Europeans or OECD countries, 10% of their ODA on agriculture, they have to, well, firstly, I think that's actually related to a previous commentator. We have to provide information knowledge to drive the whole political process. Information knowledge is also related to what Kale said. Information knowledge to empower them to drive that process. Spending on agriculture is good for the poor or the hungry people. And in Africa, yes, they like to use the block grants to set their own priorities, right? They receive so-called budget support. So that's why the capacity in that country is so critical to analyze what are the best returns from your budget allocation to achieve hunger reduction, poverty reduction. Again, that's also related to the political process. Empower the poor farmers, empower the consumers. The consumers, they also have to be empowered to make sure that the food they consume is nutritious, safe as well, and healthy. Hope that's short enough.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm actually going to move on because there's getting a lot of questions on Twitter as well. So if you don't mind, Dennis, I think we'll take that your comments are noted, and if you need to continue the discussion. We got a very funny tweet from Dennis Griffin, who would be known to a lot of people, I think, in Teagasc. He's a potato farmer. But Dennis, one of the things about tweet is how much can you pack into a small tweet? And he's managed to pack in a heavily politically loaded question into a very short tweet. He says, how can we tell foreign direct investment from land grabbing? I think his point basically being that there's a great deal of large countries now investing, quote unquote, in developing countries, and he's wondering, how much of it is land grabbing and how much of it is actual investment in the kinds of things that you describe as being necessary. I recognize that it's quite politically weighted.
Well, initially, I think some of the statistics overestimated the areas on the so-called land grab. But we do want to make sure that any investment or any future investment needs a guideline. Together with FAO, the World Bank, IFAD, under this World Food Security Committee, developed a voluntary guidelines for land tenure. I really hope that the private sector investment or even government, state-owned companies, when they invest in Africa, in South Asia, they follow that guidelines to make sure that smallholders have the land rights. They own the land. On the other hand, we also wanted to make sure that certain investment can bring opportunities, technology opportunities, market opportunities, employment opportunities to the countries in Africa and in South Asia. So what we need to do is to make sure that this investment can have win-win opportunities.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a question down here.
Trevor Donlan, an economist with Teagasc. A question, I guess, principally for Dr. Fan. In our drive to increase the production of agricultural commodities globally, does Dr. Fan have a view on whether there's a risk that we'll succeed in producing more feed rather than more food? And in that context, I'm particularly thinking of the growth in meat demand in countries such as China, which is now already at 50 kgs per head. And just to put it in context, that's about, I think EU would be about 90 kg per head. So does Dr. Fan have a view on whether we can actually direct the increase in global agricultural commodity production to people who are lacking in food?
Obviously, we do not want to dictate persons' as a consumption pattern of behavior. However, the market sometimes fails to address certain externalities or negative impact on the environment or health. Yes, the Chinese, Brazilians are consuming enough meat because some of the cost of meat production has not been integrated into pricing, like the carbon emission. Right? Beef production emits 10, 20 times more carbon than certain crops, vegetables, fruits. So the environmental impact has not been integrated into that pricing. And health impact, so if you eat too much meat, then you will have all kinds of chronic diseases. That person will suffer, but the whole society will also have to pay the health cost. And that health cost has to be integrated in pricing of meat. When we consider all this, I'm not afraid of saying that we should tax meat to take into consideration of its environmental and health costs, because market will not be able to do that. In the meantime, we could also use some of the revenues to subsidize or to support, not necessarily subsidize, to support more nutritious food production, vegetables and fruits. So that sort of public policy will correct the market failures.
Okay, I have a couple of final questions before we wrap up. I want to go right back to a tweet that we got very early on in the discussion, and that was from Niamh O'Connor. She tweets as Niamh Cairns, and she's doing an MSc in food security. But her question, I think, is quite pertinent, and I'd be interested in hearing the panelists, all of you, talk about it. What opportunities are there for young people to get involved in this area, and what should they do? I mean, particularly picking up on Dr. Fan's point about the youth of the African population and so on. How can young people coming into the system in Ireland get involved in this and become part of this important issue? Anyone want to handle that?
Yeah, thanks very much. I mean, I think in many ways, young people are much more tuned in to some of these issues through the likes of Twitter and social media, and I think that's a fantastic way. And I think increasingly, in terms of government, the more we use those kind of social media, the more voice you see being given to young people in terms of that kind of interaction. But I suppose there's many ways in which you can get involved through, from a development aid perspective and awareness of those kind of issues. I would certainly say that getting involved in development education is key. So knowing the world around you, not being blind, not just sitting in your living room in Dublin watching soaps, but actually finding out a little bit more about the world around you. And I think development education is key to that. And I think a lot of work has been done in school curricula to try and broaden out the education to look at those kind of global issues. And I think that's the first point of departure where young people can get involved. Certainly from an Irish Aid perspective, we have an Irish Aid Centre on O'Connell Street, and we have a very good and brand new website up and running. And I think that's a really good way for young people to engage with the kind of global development issues that we're trying to work on. And those are two areas that I would encourage young people to get involved with. Take a look at our website and try and engage with some of the issues that you're seeing on it. Engage with us through social media and engage with your local politicians and your TVs. That's a very clear way to engage with those kind of issues. Whether you have a vote, whether you don't have a vote just yet, you still have a voice, and to engage with that political system is really important.
Okay, thanks very much.
I just add to that maybe a different perspective. I think young people in our country are first and foremost involved in food security through becoming farmers. And I'm glad to say there's an increasing intake both at university and vocational college level. I think also, and I think what this debate has done, and I'm speaking someone from looking back on, from a university perspective, what this debate has done is it's encouraged young people in their careers, say university, to think of how they can apply their knowledge to these global challenges. I mean, that's a fantastic motivation for any student going through college. We need a broad range of scientific input to deal with the challenges that are laid out here. And it's not, I'm not only talking about agriculture and food science. I think all of the sciences, we require the best people to become conversant in mathematics, modeling scientists, modelers, climate change, and so forth. And I think that really is I remember dealing with students, the question they always ask, why am I doing this program? Well, I think in Dr. Phan's contribution today, there are innumerable reasons as to why bright young people would be attracted into disciplines that could potentially be employed and the knowledge employed to address these global challenges.
I add just one or two sentences. I think for young students, now they should really looking for multidisciplinary training programs, integrate policy, economics, nutrition, health. So far, we have not seen students who are having this sort of multidisciplinary training. There's a great opportunity for them to pursue a career in this area. And for young farmers, government policy is also required to make sure that they have access to land, to capital, to credit, so they can run a farm as a business, not a social program. So it's a business. This is true for Europeans. It's also true for Africans. African young people who do not have employment opportunities in cities. But back in agriculture, there are still enough land. Instead of land being grabbed by some foreign investors, you should give it to farmers, young farmers, so they can run it as a business.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to call on Matt Dempsey now to come up, and while he's coming up to join us, you can take your time, Matt. There's no mad rush, but I'm going to get Matt to close the session. But just one final question, if I may, for Dr. Phan. It's an issue which is one of the themes of the Global Food Report, but we didn't get a chance to discuss it all really this evening. It was just if you wouldn't mind saying a few words about the importance of getting women involved in the agricultural economy and addressing, in particular, how the role of women in all of this can make a difference.
This is an extremely important topic. So how can we empower women in agriculture, in economic activities? For the last 2 or 3 years, IPRI has been working with the USAID and Oxford University in developing an index called Women Empowerment in Agriculture Index. And to track that indicators across different countries, you really put politicians in hot spot. So where do you rank in terms of your women's empowerment in agriculture? That empowerment includes political voice, but also in terms of owning the assets, land, water, and decision making. There's 6 indicators in that index. And we need to continue to do that to make sure that the countries, the leaders, will be accountable for that index. A global food policy report, we have a chapter there on women in agriculture empowerment. So I suggest you look at that publication in more detail. We have a couple of senior researchers working on these topics. If you're interested, please visit our website.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Phan. I'm not going to attempt to summarize, but there's no point in pretending that we weren't exposed to some new thoughts. As the 3rd or 4th largest beef exporter in the world, the idea of integrating the full cost of meat production through some kind of tax mechanism was original and at least gives us some room for thought. And I'm sure my colleagues will try and tease this out in the Farmers Journal as we cover the event next week. From an RDS point of view, I really would like to thank Teagasc, Lance O'Brien, Philomena Haughey, Hilary King, and Director Jerry Boyle, obviously, for pulling such a conference together with us here in the RDS. It has exposed us to a line of thought and thinking that perhaps we were too sheltered from for too long. And Dr. Fan has done a real service in exposing us to a line of thought that I certainly hadn't experienced before. He also, I think, exposed us to points of view that are in the ideal, but how they get integrated into the practical, I think, is an entirely different issue. And I think that's also one that is going to be really well worth pursuing. At this stage, I think we have to draw the conclusions to an end. I'd like to thank Leo Enright enormously for his very capable chairmanship of the whole process. I'd like to thank you for coming. And on behalf of the RDS, I'd like to thank the audience for participating, especially our panel and Kate Morn on behalf of the Department of Foreign Affairs and their Irish Aid programme. It's been a very interesting evening and the most original one. So safe home, and thank you very much again.